I think the US education sector has such a culture of philanthropy. And like, that's not to say every university or every school or institution in the US has that. But in my experience, you have to build that culture because it's going to make your regular giving and your fundraising successful.
Welcome to the Independent School Podcast. Thinking and acting strategically is the key to both securing the future of your school and helping to build a more equal and just world. My name's Juliette Corbett. I'm a consultant, speaker and facilitator specialising in helping independent schools. In this podcast, I translate tried and tested strategy and fundraising techniques into a language that works for schools. So if you're a senior leader in a private school and you want your daily work to feel less exhausting and more strategic, and if you want once more to feel the joy of making the world a better place through education, then you're in the right place. Welcome, and let's get started on this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode, where I'm really pleased to be joined by Kristina McClendon, Deputy Director of Development for Magdalen College School, Oxford. Now, Kristina and I have a conversation to share with you today about all things regular giving. Now, for those of you not au fait with all the fundraising terminology, regular giving is where we're encouraging lots of people within your school community to give, preferably on a regular basis, although sometimes it's a one-off basis, giving relatively small amounts. So we're not talking about big kind of 6-7 figure gifts here. We're talking about small monthly or quarterly donations in order to support the fundraising project that you're prioritising. And in Kristina's case at MCS, they're prioritising bursaries. So as well as talking about the structure that Kristina's put in place around regular giving at Magdalen College School, she also dives into how they're talking about bursaries, both immediate bursaries and endowment funding for bursaries as well. Now, what I'm really delighted about the fact that we have Kristina to join us on the podcast is she's able to span the Atlantic and give us a little bit of a perspective from both the US and the UK, because a lot of her experience has been within the US and now she's adapting it within a UK environment. And in actual fact, I think this is highly relevant also within Australia, within South Africa, New Zealand, potentially Canada, countries where the US culture of philanthropy isn't quite as established, but where there's a real momentum behind education developing that culture of philanthropy. And obviously, we're focusing on schools in particular. So Kristina McClendon has served as the Deputy Director of Development at Magdalen College School in Oxford since May 2020. And previously she worked in development roles within higher education at NYU Stern School of Business and at Pepperdine University as well. So Kristina delivers all of the fundraising activity at MCS, including the management of the regular and mid-level giving programmes, as well as the cultivation and stewardship of a portfolio of donors. She acts as a relationship builder, a storyteller, content and data strategist, and a professional problem solver. And actually that's a great description of what we do in fundraising. It's all these different elements pulled together, the storytelling and the strategy, the relationship building, all pulled together to have an effective result. And Kristina's really looking at a multi-channel fundraising approach. So she's looking at combining lots of different ways of getting the message out there to potential donors. And she describes this in our interview as a surround sound approach, in the way that you can build your regular giving to then work as a pipeline to create opportunities for further conversations one-to-one with potential endowment donors as well. I just want to pause for a moment to say thank you to you. The Independent School Podcast has now passed its second birthday, published more than 100 episodes and has had over 6,000 listens. As the founder and host of this podcast, I've been really humbled by the number of people who have told me that it's really helped them. From school heads who've rushed up to me at conferences and told me how it's been a real guide for them through tricky times, through to experienced directors of development who have said it reassures them that they're on the right track. So thank you for listening and for all your kind comments along the way. If this podcast is helping you, then I invite you to join the 300 people who have asked to get my weekly emails. That way you'll hear about each episode as it's published, as well as the special offers that I only tell people about when they're on my mailing list. So to get my weekly emails, you can go to www.consultjuliette.co.uk/sign up. Hello, Kristina, and welcome to the Independent School Podcast. It is fantastic to have you here with us here today.
Thank you so much, Juliet. It's great to be here.
So, we are going to be diving into topics surrounding the idea of regular giving. But before we launch into that, I'd love to hear why you're in this sector. Like, you're obviously a natural fundraiser, but you've chosen to fundraise for education. Why is that? What's the root of that passion for education, do you think?
Well, I'm from the United States and education is very expensive there. And I've always worked as a fundraiser in higher education, mostly. Magdalen College School is my first time working in a school. And one of the things I noticed when I interviewed here in January 2020 was that MCS just seemed like the type of school I would have thrived. The kids are so bright, the pupils work so hard, and they have such a joy of learning, and they're so curious. And I looked around in my interview, I look around now, and I just think this is a school that I really would have benefited from as a pupil. I would have benefited from so many of the teachers and so many of the interesting clubs. I help with Archive Club. I've helped with Handbell Society. I assist with the Charities Committee. There's so many opportunities for these kids to learn inside and outside the classroom. And it just, compared to higher education, I just feel like it brings the case for support to life in a way that I have found, so exciting.
And you say that your experience prior to that was in higher education. So I did the same kind of transition. And I remember the first time working in a school, felt a little bit alien for the first month or so, because there's lots of little people running around. I'm not used to this. But then actually there's this infectious enthusiasm that you can't help but to feel every day. That's quite different to a university setting, I found.
Oh, exactly. And I think it's just so great to be I'm naturally a very enthusiastic person. And I felt that while I was at school and while I was at university. And although I learned a lot of great things and a lot of best practice in the higher education sector, I feel so at home being in a school and really being surrounded by all of this joy for learning, joy for the school, and really joy for what we're fundraising for. Fundraising for bursaries just feels so at the heart of everything everyone in the school does. And I just can't see myself having that same sort of enthusiasm fundraising elsewhere at this point in my life.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about this case for support. So MCS, you're 100% focused on bursaries, or mostly focused on bursaries, aren't you?
Yes, almost 100% focused on bursaries. The school has done a few capital projects and other fundraising projects before I started in May 2020. But for now, it's all bursaries all the time. And we have two tracks that we focus on fundraising for. Of course, immediate bursaries for current pupils, but we also are building our endowment, and that's for bursaries in perpetuity. So it's been really exciting to have those two tracks and kind of see how donors might start supporting immediate bursaries and then move to the endowment model, where their gifts just have a lot more longevity because of the investment strategy.
And actually, I'm going to loop back round to that question in a moment, that balance between school need around immediate bursaries and endowment funding for bursaries, and then donor enthusiasm, because it's matching the two at different stages of your kind of culture of philanthropy that you're developing within your school. But first of all, before we get into that detail, I'd love, Kristina, can you give us a little bit of an overview of your regular giving program at MCS, the kind of the different moving parts that you've got as part of that regular giving element of the program?
Absolutely. It's been such a journey over the last almost 3 years since I've been here. Prior to me starting in May 2020, the Wainfleet office, our development office as we're called, named in honor of our founder, William Wainfleet. Prior to me starting in May 2020, we hadn't really done a lot of asking, a lot of regular asking of our community. There had been a sort of mass giving, regular giving campaign leading up to the opening of our the Richard Record Sixth Form Center in 2018, with a telethon in 2017. But prior to that, there's not a lot going on. We had planned a telethon in April 2020, but that was obviously canceled. And so when I started, they asked for me to plan a giving campaign around hardship and COVID support and bursaries. Pretty much the week I started from my bedroom, which was a little daunting, but also I was so they were so ready to just run with any idea and any best practice and see what happened. We ended up raising £250,000 for bursaries and hardship support over a 4-month period.
That's fantastic.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
I was so overwhelmed. And I think for a lot of our community, that was the first time they've really been asked, especially for our parents. And it meant that we could, we gathered all this data, we kind of knew what people wanted to support. And so we could move into a more formal, regular giving program. And for us, that looked like a telethon. So we now do a telethon every 2 years. We had our first one after a period of 5 years or 4 years in September 2021, and that raised over £200,000 according to the case standard. And we worked with Buffalo fundraising consultants, and they did a fabulous job. It felt like they were, our community was open to being asked, which is the first step, isn't it?
Exactly, absolutely.
We also had a direct mail piece that went out to all of the constituents that we were phoning. And I'm a big fan of direct mail, even though it doesn't always, bring in the money. But I just feel like it's such a great way to communicate the case for support. And for our telethon, it was really about socializing the number. We were not shy about what we were going to be asking people. And I think that really helped in terms of just, people knew that they'd be phoned. They knew what they'd be asked for. They had time to consider. And I think it helped our callers really have a sense of ownership and confidence. The direct mail piece brought in over £50,000 before calling even started, which was it was a fantastic way to get started. So then after that, we thought, you know what? Telethon has gone so well. And I really felt when I interviewed at MCS that a giving day, like they were primed for a giving day. And so we worked with Buffalo again to have our first giving day last March, the end of March 2022. And that raised almost £195,000. Which was way above what we predicted, since it was a first time doing this. And so for us, we're trying to get into this pattern of asking people. Everyone should be asked at least once a year, but there might be times where we're asking people, 2 or 3 times a year, in addition to all of our other communications. And for the most part, it's all asking for immediate bursaries, but occasionally we will do more mass regular giving asks for our endowment. And a mid-level giving society that we have called the 1480 Society. People can give £1,480 a year, including or excluding gift aid. And that's in honor of our school's founding. So we do a lot of fundraising, regular giving fundraising around that as well.
That is a fantastic summary. And just especially for people who are slightly less familiar with the structure of regular giving, I'm going to give a really quick recap. So what you talked about there is the 3 methods of asking for money from people, basically. So you talked about a telethon, which you're doing every 2 years. So you've got a rhythm kind of built into that. You've got your giving day, which is how frequently planning to do that?
Every year,
every other year, or every year? Okay.
Every
so
year.
Some years we'll have a telephone campaign and a giving day.
Yes. Which is actually this year. So this year we have our giving day on the 14th and 15th of March. And then we're going to be doing a telethon in September.
Okay. Yeah. September. So you've got a 6-month gap between the two, but they were within the same year. Fantastic. Or the same calendar year at least.
Yes.
And then you've got your direct mail, which you're obviously linking in, especially to the telethon direct mail, to give people notification of the fact they're going to be called and the ask amount. I think it really is important it does give the callers confidence to know they're following up on something that's already gone out to people. And Absolutely. I do think as well, especially for any schools who haven't done regular telethons, it's a way of making sure you get some of those hard opt-outs, so people that really don't want to be called. That's fine. Let's get that recorded on the database and not contact them about it again. But getting that through a response to the letter, so that it's just that eases the conversations for the callers a little bit, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will say too, one of the best practices that I've brought from the US model, and it's something I should probably patent or copyright because everyone keeps stealing it. It's called a surround sound approach. And so any campaign that we do, any regular giving, any mid-level giving, I want them to be asked in all of those ways: direct mail, phone, email, social media. I want them to the donor to have the opportunity to give in the way that they feel is best. And I think oftentimes in development offices, we feel like we've talked at length to our constituents about, giving, when really they're probably only picking up like maybe one tidbit or one item of information in all the comms that we're sending them. And so surround sound just makes it a bit more cohesive. It's whole, it's everything. And so that's really how we approach our regular giving program.
And that's a really key takeaway, actually, because there's a lot of hesitancy. And you mentioned there that, everyone's asked at least once a year. Then most people are asked 2 or 3 times a year. It's this idea that actually you've got to send the messages around regular giving out continually. Because let's be honest, people aren't listening. It's harsh to say it. They're not there listening, waiting for your next message. They are busy getting on with their lives, having marketing and advertising and school communications and all sorts of work communications being thrown at them continually. They're not just sitting there listening to everything you say. You're needing to actually grab their attention and get that passion and that story across as to what it is you're trying to do. And the only way to really achieve that is by, I love that phrase, the surround sound approach, because it is about just peppering them, surrounding them with this sense of this is a successful community doing exciting things. And that's that positivity, that optimism that I think you mentioned you love to bring into your work. That's brilliant.
It's been really great. And I will say too, I was so lucky that when I joined the team at MCS, they had spent all the early stages of the pandemic and before that communicating with our constituents about what was going on in school, how everyone was handling lockdown, just sending a lot of comms pieces. And I think that Susie Baker, the director of the Wakefield office, brings in such a strong communications background that it means people aren't just hearing from us when we're asking them to give, they're hearing from us all the time. And having that consistent communication is at the heart of our regular giving program.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. So you mentioned there as well that you've been using the US kind of best practice. And I think for those of us who have been in the sector, or at least educational fundraising for some time, there's this sense that you've always got eyes on the US because the new developments that are happening there can often be adapted, but then applied within the UK setting, although there's a bit of a lag sometimes, whether that's required or not is debatable. But so you mentioned kind of the surround sound approach. What else have you been seeing from US best practice, which you think we can benefit from here in the UK?
That's a great question. I mean, I hate to say it like this, but in terms of just being a bit more aggressive and being unafraid, I think, to ask people, especially because the sense that I get in the independent school sector is that so many people have such strong affinity with their school, and maybe a little bit less so with their university, or maybe they feel a strong affinity to both. But that idea that, they benefited from such an amazing education, of course you should be asking them, and you shouldn't be afraid of offending people. And I think the US is just so brazen about this because it's built into our culture. I think the US education sector has such a culture of philanthropy. And that's not to say every university or every school or institution in the US has that. But in my experience, you have to build that culture because it's going to make your regular giving and your fundraising successful. And so I think it's just trying new things and really, being willing to make that ask and not be afraid if you get a complaint here or there, or, of course, all with the GDPR and everything like that. But I think that's a big one.
Absolutely. And it's about, I love your kind of phrase, unafraid to ask. It's about having the confidence to know that your case for support is doing really exciting things, having a really significant impact on people, in this case for bursaries, young people who've had disadvantaged backgrounds, who've had challenges that they're overcoming. And That's really powerful. So let's have the confidence to ask people, because people won't get if they're not being asked.
It's true. I also think giving days have been going on in the US for at least the last 10 years. And I helped on several when I was working at the NYU Stern School of Business. My alma mater, Pepperdine University, runs giving days every year. And it's really about evoking that sense of joy. And I was a little nervous when I joined MCS that maybe a giving day was too American and that it'd be a little too much. And I think in some ways me being American actually does really help. Like I just don't have any self-preservation when it comes to being out there and enthusiastic. And I think it's helped get a lot of my colleagues on board in a way that like maybe they wouldn't naturally have that these ideas or this enthusiasm. And so I think here we talk a lot about how giving days, like we'll see if this like trend keeps up. But in the US, it's still working and it's still something exciting. And so I think while some things haven't quite translated in the same way, such as ambassadors, in the US, there's a lot of work that goes into giving days for engaging ambassadors. There are ways to adapt it here. And we've had a lot of our notable our Old Wayne fleets, our alumni and parents actually record short videos for social media about why they support the school or why bursaries matter to them, and then we've posted them in advance of Giving Day. So yeah, I think there's like lots of things that you can take from that. But
I think that's really interesting though, because I mean we've been talking about peer-to-peer fundraising. I mean I remember first talking about it largely within a legacies context, the idea of sort of co-signatories to letters, back in the day, when that's what we were focusing on. We have had that tradition in the UK, and I think maybe what works more is ambassadors that are almost like an elevated testimonial, if you like.
Yes.
I think what has struggled to translate into the US is ambassadors where there's actually genuine peer-to-peer asking, where the people are empowered to ask on behalf of an institution. And I don't know whether that's to do with underconfidence, because we're still perhaps, and actually I'm talking about the UK, but actually there are many other markets, so certainly within Australia, within New Zealand, within South Africa, that we're seeing that there's a kind of a growth in that culture of philanthropy. And I do think these are things worth trying, because if you find the right person or a couple of right people, it works. It's just that maybe it's not, you're going to have to try more people to find the types of characters for whom a proper, genuine peer-to-peer advocate model is going to work. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, I've seen that a lot. When I was at the Stern School of Business, we had a really robust fundraising program for their reunions. And a business school, they're very competitive. So it was really easy to get them motivated to ask their peers to give. So that way, their year group would come out on top that year as, fundraising the most. Now, that's something I just don't see working at least in my current context. And maybe that would work better for boarding schools that have a little bit more affinity with their houses and things like that. But I feel like, try it. If it doesn't work, it's okay. But I think that's another thing, like in the US, you're just so willing to try all these new things and see if it works. And if it doesn't, you just move on and it's okay. And I think that's something that I have really enjoyed in my current role, is that we're just kind of unafraid to try something new.
And that is really, really important, isn't it? So one of the things that I want to touch on is this idea of regular giving. A lot of people who are fairly new to it expect it to be quite straightforward, quite easy. It really isn't. And so one of the things that I come across fairly frequently is talking to maybe a director of development who's actually quite happy with the response rate they got to a particular email mailing, for example. But either the more junior members of their team who are a bit fresher to regular giving, or maybe the senior leaders who are a little bit less familiar with regular giving themselves, kind of think that that's actually quite a low response rate. They're a bit disappointed by the response rate, and they kind of see that as, oh, we can't do that again, it didn't work. Whereas actually I think that there is this sense of, firstly, you have to try different things and see what does work, but secondly, it takes time to build it up. And actually you're not always going to get a big flood of donations, because actually sometimes that's not the goal. The goal, you were talking about this in your direct mail piece earlier, your goal is around providing that surround sound comms messaging, but not every piece that goes out there is going to result in actual floods of donations. That's not a failure.
It's not. And one of my favorite examples of this is we send a donor report every year, every autumn, to our donors and to all of our current parents. And it's something that I did in the US as well when I was at NYU, and I love it. It's showing, what the funds were spent on last year. It's illustrating impact in such a specific way. It's such a good stewardship piece. But one of the things that I suggested to the team when I started was that we need to be including a gift form in this mail pack. It's a soft ask. This is going to people who already support us, so the likelihood of making them angry with an additional ask is pretty low. And granted, when I was at NYU, this type of ask would bring in $20,000 easily. I knew that wasn't going to be the case here. And for us over the last few years, it's definitely been a drip. We'll have a few weeks, especially around the Christmas holidays, where, we'll get checks for 50, 100 pounds, whatever it is. But people take note and yes, that particular ask isn't going to make you a ton of money. If anything, you're spending a lot of money on the stewardship piece, but I think it really illustrates just how focused, even if something doesn't work as an ask, as a stewardship piece, it's still great. And there's still it will motivate people to give. It will.
And it's also a demonstration of confidence that you're so proud of what you're doing in terms of the impact of what you're fundraising for, that you almost couldn't help yourself. You couldn't help yourself but slip in a donation form, because you're so excited and proud about the project that you're kind of sharing with the world and encouraging people to give to. And I think to shy away from that sort of soft ask mechanism, putting a donation form in with things, or sometimes it's a donation link into an email communication and so on. Actually, we, especially in the UK context, we can't keep shying away from that, because it really does show that we are somehow worried that we're not going to be, we're going to be annoying people. Whereas actually what we should be thinking about is actually this is the impact that we're having is so important to us personally that we just can't help ourselves.
I totally agree.
Again.
Yeah. I'd also say too, when it comes to trying new things, is that setting expectations is so important, whether that's within your team, or with your senior leadership team, or, with whoever is making the decisions or managing budgets, or, all of those things. I've worked places where they've tried things that have not gone well, and the fallout was just so unpleasant for everyone involved, because expectations were not, set appropriately. And I think one of the nice things about the fact that the UK sector is still growing and developing is that participation is still so important. And so even if you're not bringing in the monetary goals that you have, if your participation is up there, that's something worth celebrating. Yeah,
especially if it's new donors, like first-time donors or long-time lapsed donors, bringing them back in. Yeah, definitely. So one of the other things, that topic of conversation that I know comes up quite a lot at the moment, is around the cost of living crisis, which I actually think we've got to stop using that phrase, because the more we call it a crisis, the more everyone assumes it's a crisis. But still, what we do know is that within many countries across the world, there are people that are really struggling with inflation, with job insecurity, with the impact of economic downturn and so on. Now, my attitude is we need to dial in more to the best practice, and that actually we need to be refining what we're doing and doing it more effectively and more efficiently, but that we must keep going. We must keep asking. What are your thoughts around adaptations that you've been making to the impact of inflation or economic downturn? Have you made changes?
To be honest, we're just pressing on like we would normally do. Of course, inflation is having, putting pressure on our budget, which is something that we need to look at as we plan our year ahead. But I've always heard about, studies that were done during the 2008 recession and other, recessions before that said institutions and charities that kept fundraising during recessions actually came out better than the ones that stopped. Yes. And I think that MCS definitely found that during COVID. We didn't stop, we pressed on, and I think people will give. People who can give will give. And people who can't give might pause for a second. Maybe they'll cancel their direct debit. But if you're in touch with them and thanking them for their gifts and just like keeping that relationship going, even if they've stopped giving, that's not to say they won't come back when things are looking up. And so I think, again, it's that confidence. Like, you need to know that your case for support is really important, and that, you're not bothering people or being insensitive by asking, especially if you're doing it in such a way that is understandable. For us, because we have our Giving Day coming up, and I've been concerned about, cost of living and how that will impact this year's results. Will we beat last year? Probably not, but that's okay. And I think for us, it's just highlighted the need for bursaries is ever greater. And we're confident about communicating that to our community and saying, like, of course, like, there are families that are really struggling. But we know that, like, a bursary will be life-changing for this, and transformative for these people. So if you can give, do. And I think people respect that kind of transparency and that vulnerability in your communications.
Absolutely. And certainly if you're fundraising for bursaries or any form of kind of hardship student support of any kind that's means tested, then your case for support is a lot stronger in times of economic turmoil, which is not a great thing to say, but actually it can be beneficial in the sense that it gives a sense of urgency. It gives a sense of an immediate problem that can be, that if we come together as a community, we can start to be part of the solution to. And I think as well that and again, you've got to be careful. You don't want to hang too much of your case support off messaging that's going to kind of ebb and flow with the political kind of cycle. But at the same time, there is a general increase in awareness around inequality within most Western societies, and that's increasingly getting media coverage and increasingly being seen as a challenge that we need to be addressing. And so obviously we see it here in the UK very acutely around the media coverage around private schools, but even if in your own country, you're not seeing it immediately in the news all the time, there is a sense that schools, fee-paying schools, can be part of this solution to social mobility, to kind of helping reduce income inequality, and that it's reinforcing that case for support that you're getting out there, and then having the confidence, as well as little tweaks to the messaging, like you just mentioned, sort of when you're talking to donors about, we understand if this isn't right for you, we understand. And certainly if someone was to cancel a direct debit, the response needs to be incredibly understanding. And, we hope that you'll be able to join us in this kind of quest again soon to increase this level of bursary provision.
Absolutely. One thing too, I will say that we're doing this year is MCS, like, one of the main aims of the school is to allow pupils the opportunity and the encouragement to serve in their local community, whether that's through community service opportunities or partnerships. And so I'm really excited this year, actually, that for our Giving Day, we're not having pupils fundraise. Like, they're not doing any funded fundraising challenges or anything like that, but we're having them do a collection for food items for one of our partner charities, Homeless Oxfordshire. And it's kind of that idea that, MCS is giving back in the way that we can, and people are, contributing to bursaries here, and it's really exciting. I just met with our charities committee to get them to, plan the whole collection, and it's really exciting to see them be so enthusiastic about giving back to their local community and doing something in a very tangible way that gets them involved in Giving Day as well. And so I think there's a lot of creative ideas that schools could do that's not just fundraising for the school, but is really looking at that whole approach about where they're situated and, like, how they can really help people that are suffering during all of this.
Absolutely. And it's that overlap, isn't it? The work around partnerships and community kind of liaison, which now can really sit alongside what we're doing with the bursaries fundraise. I think it's exciting times ahead, but certainly seeing schools experiment with how we combine these different projects, and thinking about the messaging and thinking about the impact on the young people at your school, as well as the young people in the community or other state school environments in which you're kind of partnering with. I think it's fantastic, really exciting times. One thing I said earlier on that I want to loop back to, which I think is now really appropriate to talk about. So you mentioned that you are dually fundraising for immediate bursaries at the same time as endowment bursaries. Now, I think this is really interesting because there's a big kind of question that's often on heads and chairs of governors' lips when I'm talking to schools about this, about the school really wants to go down an endowment route because they can see that building their endowment is the long-term, strategically clever thing to do, basically, in terms of securing this support in perpetuity. But then most schools will find that if it's still early-ish days with the fundraising and culture of philanthropy journey, it's quite ambitious to go straight in just to endowment. So finding a balance between the two is definitely something that I see quite a few schools kind of playing around with and trying to get to grips with what's right for their community. So tell us a little bit about the journey that MCS has taken. You were focusing on immediate bursaries and then increasingly shifting towards doing both that and endowment. Is that right?
Yes, that's true. So I know in 2017, 2018, when the school was fundraising for the sixth form center, there were options for donors to give towards bursaries for the sixth form, in addition to giving to the actual building. Around 2018, 2019, the school began working with an outside consulting firm to do a feasibility study about, what's the scope and what are the goals for fundraising for an endowment. A lot of people don't know that Magdalen College School separated from Magdalen College during the 1980s, and they kind of sent us packing without an endowment. So we didn't have an endowment, which is quite rare for a school of our age, I'd say. And so in 2019, this feasibility study happened, and I think that they found the findings were that, we do have donors, especially major donors, who would be very motivated to give to a bursary endowment model, especially people who understand how investments work and how that, the return can be used for bursaries. But of course, we still need to fundraise for immediate bursaries. And so the school, we have a goal that we need every year for immediate bursaries. And I think the telethon and giving day, our regular giving program, kind of guarantees that, well, hopefully it should guarantee that we'll meet that immediate bursary goal. But for some donors, especially moving towards our mid-level and our major donors, they want a more nuanced approach. And I think that our endowment model allows them to learn about that. And so Susie Baker and I found that a lot of our endowment fundraising has to happen on a one-to-one basis. It's a lot of meetings. We have some really nice materials that we share with our donors and our prospects about the endowment and about why the school is fundraising for an endowment and what the impact is in the long term. And we have been sending these materials out more en masse as part of our telethon. We've identified a cohort of donors that we think or prospects that would give, could have the capacity and the interest to give at that level. But it's a lot of, Susie and I going out to meet people one-on-one and talk about it. And I think that we are actually striking the right balance because our regular giving is a pipeline for this endowment fundraising. It's, regular giving is really letting people raise their hand and say, yes, I want to support the school. I want to support what you're doing. And depending on how much they're giving or how often they're giving or what they're giving to, we can really identify those people that are interested in the endowment and go from there. And I think a lot of times development offices, focusing on major giving is always great. And it takes so much time, both for the director and your fundraisers. But at the same time, because I'm coming from the US model, I really think that there's something important about getting that pipeline going. And the value of regular giving sometimes is not necessarily the money that you're raising. It's just identifying those people that will support you at whatever level they can.
Yes.
And then you move them along the donor journey in a really meaningful way. And then, they might be giving 500,000 pounds to support a bursary in perpetuity. And so I just think it takes time, but it also is really important, identifying that balance and understanding what donors are providing at each level.
Yeah.
And what you're providing to them at each level, I'd say.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned a kind of stewardship circle, a giving circle earlier. And I actually, at this point, I'm going to point people to listen to a previous podcast episode that I did with Susie Baker, Director of Development at MCS, talking about that major gifts fundraising work. And actually listening to the two podcasts together gives you an all-round picture of what the kind of the model that you're putting together. But it is really important to understand regular giving as a pipeline for self-identification of prospects for major gifts as well. And that kind of brings me to my last question. So my last question is going to be in two parts, and I haven't warned you about this, so hopefully you're going to have some ideas for people. Okay, so first of all, for people who are listening who don't really have much of a regular giving program, maybe it's been a bit patchy, a little bit kind of here and there, what would you say is the minimum that schools should be trying to do each year to get that kind of the ball rolling, to start to create that pipeline?
Oh, that's a great question. I'd say ask, like, if you only have budget or scope for one ask, like, make it a really good one. And I think for MCS, we found a digital campaign worked best for us in summer 2020. We called it Conveniamus, which is Latin for like to come together, which is a very MCS thing to do, to name something with a Latin name. But it didn't cost that much because we didn't really do a print. We did a small print run for those that are post only. But other than that, it was just all on our website. And it was, emails that we would send out with our normal email channel. And of course, it took time for the team to, put all this together, put a campaign together. But digital fundraising is a cheaper option. Ask, just make the ask.
I completely agree. I'm so glad. I love it when someone gives the answer that I've got in my head. Yes, find a good way to ask everyone at least once a year, and find a way that's going to be time effective, but it's going to have a bit of excitement, a bit of fun, a bit of kind of pizzazz about it, so that it can grab people's attention.
Exactly. We made it unique for our audience. So we had it was an email that had, some perhaps our alumni president asking, and then we had a benefactor of the week section where we focused on some of our historic benefactors. And it was we got to work with our archive, who fall under our office. We got to do some creative things. We had links about our Giving Society. We had links about our Legacy Society. And it was just kind of like an interesting email that people could look forward to reading.
Brilliant. Fantastic. And then the second part of my question. So let's say for schools who are a little bit kind of further along the journey, they've got the basics in place. This is a really unfair question because I know regular giving is about lots of pieces of the puzzle that all fit together. But which part of your regular giving program would you not live without? If you had massive budget cuts, which part would you kind of really defend, really say we've got to keep doing this particular thing?
Oh, that's so tough. So the American in me wants to say I'd get rid of telethon, just because telethons are on the out in America, because we don't really have the same direct debit system. It's really difficult to manage recurring giving. Although here I know, though, that recurring giving is amazing. And once you get someone into a direct debit, you hopefully will have them for life. I actually, I'm going to say stewardship. You can't do anything well in a regular giving program without good stewardship. Yes. And I just think whether you're doing a telethon or a giving day or a digital campaign, stewardship is how you're going to, keep your donors. And I think that's whatever that is. If it's thank you letters, thank you emails. In the US, we work on a 3, 6, 9, and 12-month model where people should be receiving a thank you from you at those junctures. So, when they first make their gift, 3 months later, 3 months after that, 3 months after that. And whatever that thank you is, it's great. Donor report, a thank you letter. We do a benefactors garden party every June for our donors. I think stewardship is how you're going to get, you're going to retain the donors. You're going to get them in the door because it's communicating impact.
Yeah.
So
And you're going to get those advocates, those cheerleaders who,
Yes.
Even if you're not asking them to ask others, they're going to be talking about how fantastic it is to be part of this giving community. Kristina, thank you for allowing me to put you on the spot. This has been a really fascinating conversation. And for people listening who want a little bit more information, certainly I would recommend going to listen to Laura Firth's podcast episode about saying thank you and all about stewardship. I'll put a link to that in the episode notes, as well as Susie Baker's that I mentioned before. And then Ed Lang of Buffalo's also done an episode on the podcast talking about regular giving around choices between giving days and telethons and how to get that rhythm and that structure into a regular giving program. So I recommend that one too. Kristina, thank you so much for your time today. I love your surround sound approach. I think we're going to trademark it. I'm going to credit you, but I'm going to probably be using it. I love the idea that we need to be unafraid to ask, because we're so excited by what it is that we're fundraising for. And I think what you've charted for us here is a really nuanced way of developing a regular giving program, which can start to create a pipeline both for immediate bursaries, but also really importantly for those endowment conversations which come further down the track. Absolutely. So thank you for Kristina. Thank you very much for your input today.
Thank you. This has been such a joy. Yeah, such a joy to chat. So thank you so much for inviting me to participate.
You're very welcome. I'm sure we'll have you back on the podcast again soon. Thank you, Kristina. Thanks for listening to the Independent School Podcast, the podcast that helps senior leaders in private schools to think and act more strategically, both because they want to secure the future of their school and because they want to help build a more equal and just world. You can listen in everywhere that podcasts are available. And if you want to catch up on previous episodes or follow any of the links that I've mentioned today, just head over to www.consultjuliet.co.uk/podcast.